non-linear? Is it not normally distributed? Is it homoscedastic versus heteroscedastic? If it violates what's on the slide, there is a violated assumption. You need to tell me what is violated. That's 10 marks. You have to identify what it is that is violated. The other 10 marks is, what did you do to fix it and why? So if you can tell me, for example, that there is an outlier. There is an outlier in the data. That's a problem. To get the full marks for evaluating for outliers, you have to be able to tackle that issue. So for example, I chose to delete case number 67 because it was an outlier likely to skew the result. I filtered out for case number 67 because it was an outlier likely to skew the result. So now, because you told me what was wrong and how you fixed it and why, you would get the full allotment of marks for that error. You just have to follow that error throughout. Does that sound good? Okay, question 1 is worth 30 marks. Oh, it's 60 marks actually. So the analysis and interpretation is 30. Your understanding of the findings is 30. So see what I'm saying? They're significantly heavily weighted. Yep. Yeah, I'm going to go through what components you want as well, so you'll know a better idea of what's attributed to what. So just before I do that specifically, I'll give you your breakdown for your question 2. It's 20 marks. It's 10 and 10. Analysis and reporting is 10. Your understanding is 10. Moving into the bottom half of this rubric, I'm going to tell you some things that you should be looking for. So for your data screening, maybe we should be looking for missing cases. Maybe we should be looking for skewness and kurtosis, which you should probably have in your SPSS tips and tricks. I'm pretty sure it's in that. But essentially, it's you running a histogram. So when we're looking for skewness and kurtosis, your favorite thing is something that looks like this. This is called a normal curve. If it looks like this, or like this, it's skewed. Your job is to tell me, is it positively skewed? Is it negatively skewed? Or is it a normal curve? With respect to kurtosis, you also have 2 options. Your ideal is your normal curve. If it comes out like this, or like this, there is an issue. This is platykurtic, this is leptokurtic. So essentially you have to tell me, is the data a normal curve? Is it platykurtic? Is it leptokurtic? What does that mean? What are you going to do to fix it? Now the funny thing is, if you guys look at this, remember what I said earlier about the dragging of things? If we're looking at this, it's supposed to look like this. Something has pulled it in one direction or the other. What does the pull? Outliers, right? So, by way of that, you could say, oh crap, well, if it's positively or negatively skewed, you could probably look at your scatter plot and identify that there was something there pulling that data. So essentially, how can you correct for that? You can get rid of an outlier, right? Using your different visuals. We did a lot of scatter plot stuff today. Probably important. And you also want to look at your range. People can make mistakes when inputting data and stuff like that. Take a look at your data, see if everything makes sense. There should be a credible range for what it is you're looking at. If something doesn't fit, filter out, delete, tell me what you did and why. Yeah. And then your tackling is basically your rationale, what was done and why. So that's 10 marks. So you get 10 marks for identifying the issues, 10 marks for telling me what was done and why. For your correlation, to get full marks, I need screenshots. So you guys have to put in screenshots, and please put them in your Word document. It just makes it really hard for me to grade at the same time if your output is on a different screen in a different software. So if you guys have a Mac, if you have an HP, screenshot, screen capture, throw it right in there. If it comes out to 20 pages with your screenshots, that's fine. I will parse through and I will look at it as long as it's readable. Please make sure I can read it, because if I can't read it, then I can't validate your findings. So make sure it's in there, make sure I can read it. That's the gateway. You have an analysis and reporting / interpretation of SPS as output, which is 30 marks. So you guys are looking at 3 variables. There's obviously 3 relationships. You need to go through this process for every single one of those relationships. If you have to set it up like this, I would encourage you to do that. Whatever it is that works best for you to make sure you have all the components is what I would really, really like to see. We need to also see CIs. So remember that box that got covered? Just make sure you go in, click confidence intervals and ask for that, because it asks for your CIs on the rubric. And then 30 marks for your understanding of the findings. So you remember that sentence we came up with? The sentence that contains 1, 2, 3 of those things? That needs to be there. And what also needs to be there is what happens. So not only are you saying significance, strength, and direction, what happens to that? As one variable increases, the other also increases. So in this case, as weight increases, so does height. In this case, as weight increases, or physical education increases, weight decreases. I would encourage you to think logically to the best of your ability. If we're thinking about this, we're not going to say that it goes both ways, but it would be easier for you to say increase in physical activity results in a decrease in weight. You could say an increase in weight is related to a decrease in physical activity. It goes both ways, but just make sure that you guys are able to convey that to me in a way that I can understand it. For this one in particular, it's a logical finding and it makes sense. The more you exercise, the more weight you lose. The relationship attests to that. So it's saying as one thing goes up, the other comes down. Just try your best to interpret those findings in a way you can understand. Yeah. I will give you marks for your output as well. Obviously, more marks are attributed to your technical and substantive interpretations. But the cool thing is, with the actual pictures of what you've done, if you decide to use your executive judgment and say, like, I think this is hetero versus homoskedastic, and I can see it, and I'm like, okay, that's logical, that makes sense. I can see why it is that they were saying that. Odds are you'll get more marks. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I will run through that again for you. I'll just go back through just proportional correlation so you know the distribution for the grading. This also includes your SPSS output with your partial correlation box. So I'm expecting you to run 2 correlations. You have your bivariate with your 3 variables, and then you have your partial correlation controlling 4. I need to be able to see 2 tables. You have to run both, okay? And then you have controlling, it's basically the same thing that we're looking for the analysis and reporting for your 10 marks. So it's this sentence process. So significance, direction, strength. When one goes up, does the other go up or down? And you have to include that controlling portion, because there is no point in running a control variable if you're not going to address it in your interpretation. It's cool if you run it, that's great, but if you're not telling me like, oh, I controlled for this variable, then I'm like, oh, okay, they just ran a correlation and they're just not gonna tell me what's going on with that. So just make sure that you guys actually address that. For your understanding of findings, this goes further than the first one. The first one is just these 3 sentences because that's all you have. But when you move forward with that, we want to go and extend past that. So what is the relationship between like what you found in your partial correlation versus up here? Is it the same? Is it different? What does that mean? And it will tell you something about shared variance that you guys are going to have to talk about. And it literally says all over this rubric, no mention of causality. If you can't, just don't. Just don't put the word cause in there. Relationship, correlated, that's all cool. You just can't say X causes Y, or I will have to dock marks for it. Yeah. Your question should give you information as to what you should control for. Okay, so I'll go back through the partial.